Hello, welcome to the channel. This video is about participles. Let's get started. This is a new chapter, so the first thing we're gonna do is to understand what areas is gonna cover about the participles. Let's take a look. Participles, participial phrases are very good to make your writing sound more interesting. So, in this topic, we're gonna cover three areas: present participle phrases, past participle phrases, and perfect participle phrases. And today we're gonna have another sample essay, and we are going to take a look what actually included. So, the first one we're gonna to take a look is present participial phrases. Let's take a look. What is present participial phrases? For example, living so far apart, or writing this email. It's starting with ing, so it's a present participle. Then the second one is past participle, past participial phrases. Let's take a look. Past participial phrases starting with past participle. Even some of the regular verbs are ended with ed. But in other cases, irregular verbs like go and gone, do the done. We will use this past participle verb form. Example, inspired by your opening words. Tired of meetings and business lunches. And then another area we're gonna cover is perfect participial phrases. What are they? Let's take a look. Perfect participial phrases starting with present perfect? Not exactly. It's starting with having ing and a past participle. Having just returned from a visit to Hong Kong, like this. And we also take a look at a sample essay. Let's take a look. Sample essay, a letter. Kelvin and his friend Peter were both born in Hong Kong. When they were 15, Kelvin went to live in England and Peter went to live in Canada. At the age of 21, Kelvin came back to visit Hong Kong for the first time. Read his email to Peter. So, in the letter, we have participial phrases, living so far apart, writing this email, having just returned from a visit to Hong Kong, seeing a view from the peak, having lived away for such a long time, making a complete fool of myself, visiting my grandparents in new territories. This is the second part of the participle phrases. We are going to talk about present participles. Let's take a look what areas should we cover. The first area, link between two sentences that are closely connected, giving reasons, especially replacing longer phrases with words such as because, since, or as. And number 3, talk about two actions or events happening at the same time, and some useful tips, as well as using a participle phrases that is something we have to care about. Then, what is the number one thing that we have to concern? The number one thing we have to concern is the reason of using present participial phrases. Let's take a look. We can use participial phrases to replace a longer phrase with a subject. Present participle phrase can be used to, number 1, link two sentences that are closely connected. Example, I struggled with my Cantonese, making a fool of myself in front of my relatives. I struggled with my Cantonese. I made a fool of myself in front of my relatives. Both of these sentences are sharing the one subject, I. So that's why they're connected in this way. We can replace and connect two sentences by using present participle, ing, changing the word made to become making, and take away the subject I, and put a comma. So the whole sentence will become I struggled with my Cantonese comma, making a fool of myself in front of my relatives. Then what is the other usage of participial phrases? Let's take a look. Participial phrases could give reasons, replacing longer phrases with words such as because, since, and as. Example: living in Hong Kong. This is function as a category, telling you more about the whole sentence. The reason: I know how busy and exciting life in a city can be. Living in Hong Kong actually is a sentence because I live in Hong Kong. Another example: not wishing to become unhealthy, I exercise regularly and eat healthy food. Not wishing to become unhealthy is another category, telling you the reason of exercise regularly and eating healthy food. And not wishing to become unhealthy is coming from a sentence since I don't wish to become unhealthy. There is another situation that we could use present participial phrases. Let's take a look. To talk about two actions or events happening at the same time and replaces phrases of linking verbs like while, as, and when. Example: walking down the street, I saw an interesting new shop. As I was walking down the street, I saw an interesting new shop. These two actions, was walking and I saw, they are happening at the same time. By replacing the first sentence with a present participial phrase, walking down the street, so we can tell two actions that happen at the same time to the reader. Now, there are some very useful tips while we are using present participial phrase. Let's take a look. What is it? We can form present participial phrases with verbs that are usually used in continuous tense, such as the color red, be, work to be, or no, and love, as well as wish. Example: knowing that Felix loves pizza, I took him to an Italian restaurant. That is some other very important information that you have to be aware when you're using present participle phrases. So you have to make sure both sentences are using the same subject. What does it mean? Let's take a look. Walking down the street, an interesting shop caught my eye. Who is walking down the street? Of course, it's talking about yourself. However, the second part, an interesting shop caught my eye. The subject is an interesting shop. So in this case, you means an interesting shop was walking down the street, which is completely different from the original meaning. These could not be using present participial phrase. Today, we talk about past participle. And what is past participle phrases and how can we make use of this? Let's take a look. Let us look at the verb whisper. Here's the past participle, whispered, and with ed, as a whisper is a regular verb. We could use this as an adjective in a participial phrase. So let's take a look. First example, his paint skin. The word paint is a single word using past participle as an adjective, telling you more about skin, color blue. Okay, and the other one, the boy taken to hospital, has recovered. Taken to hospital. It's a phrase using past participle as an adjective. And this color yellow is telling you more about the boy. Then let's compare with past participle function as a color red. The boy has taken his friend to hospital. Has taken. The word taken is a past participle form. However, it is function as part of the color red in the sentence, using past participle in present perfect tense. Then, how can we make use of past participle, a function as a color yellow in a sentence? Let's take a look. Past participle can often be found in participial phases. That either could be present participle, that what we have talked about last video, and also could be in past participle. A participial phrase acts like an adjective. The participial phases are shade and past participles are in bold like this. I have a heart wrecked with sorrow. So, past participle phrase wrecked with sorrow describe the heart. The heart is the color blue. Other than function as a color yellow, past participle phases could also function as a color green. How do we use it? Let's take a look. Participial phases could function as an adverb. As an adverb is a color green. And people can use past participle phases to replace because, since, and as. And people use past participle to describe people's feeling and reaction. For example, bored with studying. Mary went for a walk. Okay, the original sentence that functioned as a color green is as she was bored with studying. Mary blah 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 blah. Okay, and the other one. Not convinced by her explanation, the police started an investigation. So the original sentence, not convinced by her explanation, is because they were not convinced by her explanation. The police blah 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 blah. One last thing to remind you about past participle. Irregular verb is more straightforward. However, the regular verb and the past tense form are all ended with ed. Then let's take a look at the irregular verb that not ended with ed. For example, go, went, gone. Past participle is talking about the part, gone. If it's a regular verb, then either the past tense forms or past participle form will be ended with ed. Today, we're gonna talk about perfect participle phases. Let's take a look what areas we gotta cover. Number one, people use perfect participle phases to talk about actions or events that happen before another. Perfect participle phases are often used to give reasons. And what kinds of noun or pronoun we could use or identify in a perfect participle phrase. And how about the second part? The verb in the second part could be in different tenses. So, there are four main areas. The first one, okay, what time do we use it? And what other way we could use perfect participle phases? And the third one is, what is the first part of the sentence? What can we do with the first part? What color could it be? And what kinds of subject or object it could be identified? The second part of the sentence could be using in different tenses. Now, let's take a look at the first one. People use perfect participle phases to talk about action, an event that happened before another action or event. For example, if we have two actions, A and B, action A happened before action B, then action A could use perfect participle phases to represent. Example, having locked all doors, Sally finally went to bed. Which action happened first? Lock the door first, or went to bed first? Obviously, having locked all doors happened first, and then Sally finally went to bed. That is the second action. People could also use perfect participle phases to explain reasons. Let's take a look. People could use perfect participle phases to give reason. Example, having spent several years in Hong Kong, when they knew the city very well. Because she has spent several years in Hong Kong, that's the reason she knew the city very well. Both these actions, having spent several years and knew the city very well, happened in the past. The action in perfect participle phase happened first, and also is the reason why the second action took place. Now, how about the noun or pronoun that have been used in perfect participle phases? Let's take a look. The noun or the pronoun of the perfect participle phase mentioned could either be the subject of the main sentences or other noun that hasn't been mentioned. Example, having been accused of the thievery, Steve left the company. The subject of the main clause, Steve, is not the subject of the phrase, having been accused of the thievery. It is actually someone else. Steve was accused by someone, but not Steve accused by himself. The perfect participle phrase focuses on the action accused instead of the subject. And also, how about the tenses that we could use in the second part? I mean the main clause, the main sentence. Let's take a look. The verb in the second part of the sentence can be in the past tense, present tense, or even future tense. Here's other examples. Having completed her study. Past tense, she started working for IBM. Or present continuous tense, she is looking for an interesting job. Looking for. Future tense, she is going to travel around the world. Very nice. That's all for this chapter, and that's all for today. Like this video and subscribe our channel. See you next time. Goodbye.